Ever wondered how trailblazing risk leaders navigate uncertainty with finesse and confidence? Uncover the surprising connections between their personal journey and professional prowess, and get ready to learn and elevate your risk management game with the RiskMasters podcast. Join host Julien Haye in collaboration with Risk.net as they delve into hidden gems of risk leadership through engaging conversations and thought-provoking insights from board directors to chief risk officers and business leaders.
Welcome to this new episode of RiskMasters. Today's guest is Søren Andersen, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at CIP Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners and former Chief Risk Officer at Nordea Asset Management. With more than 2 decades across asset management, pension and banking, Søren brings a rare blend of strategic insight and operational depth. He's led global risk teams, pioneered ESG integration, and helped shape resilient governance in some of the most dynamic corners of financial services. In this episode, we explore the future of risk leadership, the growing role of compliance in strategic decision-making, and what it takes to build resilience in a time of transition from traditional asset management to large-scale infrastructure investing. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, review, and share RiskMasters. It helps us being found on your podcast platform of choice. For more insight and resources, visit avtm.com. I'm Julien Haye, and this is RiskMasters. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Søren Andersen, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. Søren, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Julien.
Søren, let's go straight into it because you had some interesting shift in your career. In fact, when you and I met 3 years ago, you were at Nordea Asset Management. Now you shifted in energy. So you worked across different sectors. What's been the most defining shift in your career in that context?
Yeah, I've worked in consulting, in banks, in pension, in asset management, so I've tried different perspectives of the financial industry, but always with this focus on risk and quant work and middle office work as such. I have always wanted to challenge myself. At some point, I can feel that now I've done the job, now I know things, I've implemented this project, things are going well, and then you suddenly want a new challenge. There is some kind of restlessness in you, and I felt that a couple of times. So I didn't necessarily need to switch job outside the current place, but it could be that I just needed something new to sink my teeth into. And I think the change from banking to asset management was very defining for me, at least. That was also when I really got my first proper CRO role, and I got a bit more freedom and independence on how to set up my risk framework and how I wanted to build my team and set our focus. So this whole new responsibility was certainly very defining for me in my career.
And if I may ask, just out of curiosity, shifting from consultancy to actually doing the work, how did you find that shift?
I liked it a lot. The consultancy part was good in the sense that you meet different companies. You very quickly get exposed to a lot of different perspectives and different organizations, different projects. But actually having the own responsibility where you start it up, you build it, and you finish it, and you work with it afterwards, that part I liked a lot. So it was very clear to me that was a world that I learned from, but I was not going back there.
So I get it that the next move will not necessarily be back in consultancy then.
Not necessarily, no.
And so shifting from asset management to infrastructure actually is a very big leap, both in terms of risk profile, complexity as well, time horizon. What inspired that move?
Yeah, I'd been in Nordea Asset Management for many years, and we had achieved so many things. We had built up a lot of good framework, good processes. I think we got the business a good step forward, and I had been there for many years. I had a really good team, some good people that were ready to also take next steps and so on. I felt very confident that this was a well-oiled machine that was working well, and I just had this idea that, okay, maybe I should try myself outside this business. It could be a different risk job in a bigger organization. It could be something more first line, more operational, but it could also be a whole new sector. There's pharmacy, there's energy, there's tech, and so on. So the opportunity that came from Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners was very easy for me. This was kind of still the same asset management, but I could utilize all my experience, all that I've worked with for many, many years, and try to implement this into this new fast-growing company where we very much build as we run. And still a lot of different risk perspectives. Now you have all these very physical assets out in the world. The risk is very, very different, and yet you have the alternative investment fund manager on top, and you have that regulation that I know well. So this whole dimension, this whole new perspective on it was very intriguing for me, and I felt that was an opportunity I didn't want to miss.
Yeah, it's completely understandable. And from an ESG perspective, you probably have seen now both sides, and I think we're going to come back to that in a few moments. And so, if you look back in your career, and I think you kind of provided already some views on that, but was there a pivotal moment that really changed the way you saw risk as a function and the way you approached it?
Yeah, I at least remember first time I joined in a pension company in Denmark, a very small pension company. I was the first risk manager that was hired, and trying to then build up what does this mean for us. But that work of actually sitting together with the actuaries and understanding in depth the asset liability relations and the bonus potentials and all these different accounting structures, that was extremely fascinating for me, and something where I could really utilize my math interest and quant interest, and try to again build something for this smaller Danish pension company. But of course, also, I mean, there has been some very defining moments like the financial crisis, where it very much at some point felt like the end of the world. But you know, in hindsight, we can see that this was actually where risk was pulled forward, put into the spotlight. This was where we also had our golden age after that, because there is a obvious need for what risk and compliance can provide. And more recently also, I remember when COVID came, the breakout was announced and back in early 20, and we had just some few months before we had dusted off some of our scenarios, some of our different tests that stress that we had prepared, some of our plans, and one of them was the pandemic. And it's not like this is purely coincidence, but it was there in our library of one of the scenarios that we wanted to be able to prepare for. And it's I remember once COVID broke out, I actually at some point felt behind the business, because they were just running and doing their stuff. They knew what to do. We had the plan. They could look it up, and they were taking things very, very seriously and responsibly. And that was super nice for a risk officer, risk responsible, to sit and look at this and say, okay, this is just running very, very well. And of course, our scenario was not perfectly in line with what actually happened, but there were some key parts there that we could use, and that worked very, very well.
It's a fantastic example. I was going to ask you how it worked out, so you just provided the response to that. And looking back at your experience as a chief risk officer, and also your engagement beyond, because you're very involved beyond your own remit, actually. What's the one misconception you believe people have about what a risk and chief risk actually does?
In my experience, in the more mature parts of the financial sector, there is a very clear understanding of what the chief risk officer and what the risk management department does and what the responsibility is. You don't need to defend your place at the table. People know when to involve you and so on. Then there are the less mature parts of the financial industry, and there things are, of course, a bit more challenging, because you need to also show the business case, show the value that you provide, and there is still some, if you don't have that knowledge, there is still this conception that when the chief risk officer comes in, let's be careful what we say, because we don't want that just provides sand in the machinery. He'll just say no to everything. So that conception of us being policemen or gatekeepers, that part is something that in certain parts of the business, we all struggle with, I guess, at least I do. It's a shame. We want to be seen as business partners. We want to provide insight. We want to also help out in supporting any business decision and the strategy work. So I see ourselves more as navigators or business partners than we are actually naysayers or gatekeepers as such. But this all requires that the business actually dares to invite us in, that management dares to invite us in, and that requires some understanding of the value that we bring.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of how you live as a risk officer, chief risk officer, your function as well. Because too often as well, people are still a bit naysayers and very conservative in their view, rather than being, as you said, business aligned and really an enabler.
Exactly.
So building on that, actually, I think it's time to look a little bit more about the role of a chief risk officer from a strategic standpoint, governance, and also connection back to more the risk processes and risk appetite. And in that context, in my experience, risk appetite can be seen as a theoretical tool. It's lots of pages of document and metrics, but it might not be used. And I've seen that many times in my career. So from your perspective, how do you make it meaningful and actionable for your day-to-day work and actually as an engagement tool for the executive and the board?
Yes, and that is the question, isn't it? First of all, you need to start, as a CRO, you need to start to understand your business in depth. So you need to also understand the actual strategy that is played out, but also the full value chain of what are we doing in this company here? What is success? What are we measured on? What are we trying to achieve? And this then needs to be somehow translated into some kind of concrete limits and thresholds. And you need to also start setting those boundaries, but also setting those measurement points. What do we want to measure? How can we somehow quantify the risk picture in simple terms so that we all understand it and we don't overcomplicate it, but it still captures the bulk of the risk we see. And that part is it's just as much an art as it is actual science. And it also, in my experience now, I've worked in a couple of places. You really need to start from scratch everywhere. You need to understand this business, because even though you have two, for example, asset managers that look very similar, the structures are very, very different, and we need to have that ingrained into our risk management framework. And this risk appetite that we can then define or agree on, this is how we measure, these are our boundaries, this is where we are comfortable and not comfortable. You need to then also put that into the processes in the business. So how do we do investment decisions? How do we do vendor assessments? How about product launches and things like that? This risk appetite, how do we make sure that this is captured or included in those decision making bodies in the business? Then a full documentation of processes and of controls and also how you monitor these different risk levels, how often and how do you get this data and with what quality. That part is quite key. And in order for this risk appetite to be operationalized, as you said, it needs to be some kind of language that we all understand. Of course, we have a taxonomy. We have a way that we define risk. When we talk about this particular risk, we almost have a book that we can look up and say, okay, this is the definition we have. This is what we understand this is, and not the rest. So we need to have a common language for how we talk about it, how we define the boundaries, and also have that conversation and to make sure we have a common understanding, me as a second line function, but also to go towards the board and management and the business, the decision takers out in the business. So it also has to do with some kind of taxonomy or business language that we need to have. I think we'll come into that later also, but this part about actually being close to the business and having that daily conversation almost with them, where they can start understanding how do I think about risk, that will help us a long way.
And I think you started answering the next question, which is, how do you align risk and compliance with business strategy, especially in an environment that is focused on really long-term infrastructure outcome, right? It's probably not 1 or 2 years, it's probably 10, 15, 20, 30 years time horizon.
Yeah. The business strategy is different for these long-term infrastructure products compared to a vanilla usage fund structure of some kind. And again, we need to then understand that business strategy in depth. And I'm only 6 months into my work here. I'm still working on that part. It takes time to really get into the weeds of the business strategy and understand that. And we can't just look at the headlines, want to save the world and want to earn a lot of money for investors and all that. We need to understand the financial structures, the stakeholder expectations, the society expectations, the whole business model, and there also, when we look at the long-term infrastructure projects, we want stable returns. We are looking very far out in the future. We are also looking at reputation. We are looking at this social license to operate. People will have opinions. Investors will have opinions about what we do. And then link all this to the risk taxonomy, to the risk themes that we have, and of course including compliance risk also as a big part of it. Infrastructure is about resilience and durability. So again, you mentioned also we look 10, 20, 30 years out in the future. When we build scenarios, we need to have that lens in our setup. It's a different way of thinking. We are less worried about short-term volatility, you could say, and much more worried about these long-term natural catastrophes, these big events that can fold out within the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And that perspective is certainly different from the world I come from. It's my understanding, at least, that even though I also in my old company, I also was trying to be close to the business and being that business partner, it certainly goes for an infrastructure asset manager like CIP. Risk and compliance needs to be closely involved. We have so much fewer but large investments. It's very illiquid. It's very hard to value. Without diminishing anything, I mean, once we dig a hole, that hole is there, and we need to make it work with that hole, right? We need to build that turbine or something like that. We can't just sell 2 ice and coats and on we go. It's a very different perspective. So I believe that risk and compliance need to be involved very early on and very closely. If the business dares to invite us in, we can provide that. Some help there and provide our insights.
And there's a question of time horizon of decision, right? Because as you say, and I'm seeing that in other sectors such as social housing and housing more broadly, decision that you make today will have a 5, 10, 20 years down the line impact. It might not even materialize straight away, but once it materializes, it's very difficult to unpick.
Yeah.
So the time horizon of decision and strategic decision making, including digging a hole and where it is and how it's being shaped, will be carried on for many, many, many years after that. How do you deal with that?
What CIP is good at is that we have these greenfield projects. So we have an actual greenfield or a waterbed or something like that, and then we can start preparing the whole work. These people are really, really good at and making all the contracts, preparing the whole project. And when everything is kind of ready and locked in, then we start pouring money into it and we start building it. And at some point, we kind of sell it off because then others are better at making it even more operational, or even better, and expanding it and so on. But the first part, the actual initial greenfield part, that part is where SIP has the edge. So we don't necessarily need to consider that this also needs to run for us in 20 years. We need to be able to sell it so that as a buyer can see that this will also run for 20 years. But our perspective is maybe a bit long term in the sense that that's how we sell it. That's how we want to build some value into this project, so that a buyer can trust that when I take this over, I can expand further on it and also me make money on it. So there is some kind of duality in this thing here. It's kind of like from my old days in pension also, when we always thought about, we are thinking 30 and 40 years into the future, but the portfolio manager is measured every month on how he or she is doing. So there is a duality in our perspectives there.
And clearly in your role in a C-suite, you have to work very closely with the board, with executives. What makes, in your experience, for a healthy and productive risk dialogue and relationship at that level?
I've had some really good experiences with working with boards, and when you sit in a mature organization where the management and the board they understand the risk and compliance perspectives and the need, they understand our processes and the value that we bring. Then there is an easier discussion. Then time is set aside for us to actually not just look at the report and say things are green, good, one red, okay, we're fixing that. It's where we can actually start discussing things, so that my risk report becomes kind of an initial conversation starter, you could say. The best relationships I've had with board is when you have these professional board members that actually show an interest. They ask questions, they look behind my report, say, okay, this compared to the last 2 reports you delivered, Søren, now I see something here. Can you explain to me what's going on here, and challenge me on my work? That's always the best thing. That's when you also feel some kind of sense of pride in your work, because you're actually getting tested and by the highest authority, and you get to discuss something that you feel is very, very important and that you kind of live 100% in your work. So setting aside time in the board meetings or in committees and so on to make sure that we can discuss these things, that we don't just look at the risk reports, things are green, all good, but we actually discuss also outlooks, what's going on with the strategy when they compare, what's the plans for the next couple of years in our strategy work, how does that look into your reports. So that part has been the best part. That's very fulfilling when you sit professionally, a good situation to be in.
So let's actually continue into the specificity of the sector, right? At Nordea, you led ESG integration. You worked on that from a fund management perspective. Since you transitioned to CIP, you're literally in the middle of it now, practically as a sector. What has changed in how we think and how you think about ESG-related risk in that context?
Yeah. And my work in Nordea was very much on the ESG integration into the risk framework. We also had an ESG department that worked on some of the more operational things, but the whole ESG integration into the risk management framework, that part was a huge deal for the bank and also for the asset management part where I was in. A place to start is, first of all, to ask, is ESG still relevant? Is it still something that the investors are seeking? There are a lot of important things going on in the world with inflation and wars and crises and geopolitical shocks and so on, tech disruptions. But ESG, in my view, and now that's of course just my view, but it is still very important. It is still something that investors want and they see the need for, and of course you can have some smaller or bigger disruptions in the industry depending on who is the president where or what's going on in different parts of the world, but there is no doubt that this is something that we still as the human race, this is something we still need to be much more focused on and throw some money at. Previously, ESG was something that was kind of standalone, so you could see it as something that was just another box in the risk taxonomy. We kind of collect the data to see, okay, are we good at this? Is there less greenhouse gas emission? Our investments, are they transitioning into some kind of more greener processes? But the regulation is really running fast and it's very, very strict nowadays. And ESG is as such also a regulatory risk. So the whole greenwashing part and the expectations from regulators and what we are measured against and what we are also sanctioned if we are not living up to, that whole that directly affects also the financials that we have. So the climate risk, social risk, and so on. It's something that directly influences the yields, the income that we can generate, and the value that is generated in the portfolio. And then of course, I mentioned greenwashing risk, also the regulatory threat that you have. If you are like CIP, you actually lean in and we issue, Article 8 and 9 funds. This is what we do. This is extremely sustainability focused, and that of course comes with given the strict regulation and the high expectations. You of course take some risk there, and you need to be very mindful of how you build your framework, how you integrate this. I see ESG as something that kind of now, instead of being that extra box in the risk taxonomy, it's something that it's a new dimension to the risk taxonomy. It's like reputational risk. In every part of your risk taxonomy, there is reputational risk, and the same here. ESG risk is something that you need to think into your processes, think into your controls and all the decisions you make, and it's something that touches most, or many at least, parts of your risk taxonomy. So a new dimension instead of something, a new box on the side.
It's an interesting way to look at it as an impact, effectively, and something that permeates across. And as you've done the transition, were there any risk that you'd never thought you would face and that you're seeing from a sustainability standpoint and working infrastructure? Anything that surprised you when you transitioned?
Yeah. Many things surprised me, but I was when you kind of sit and try to map out what kind of new risks do I have here, what kind of things that I'm not necessarily where I can't draw on 20 years of experience, where this is something, it's a new world I've gone into. I did make some notes on for example, regulatory risk and policy volatility, you could say. There are subsidies that are given. There are tax credits. There are carbon pricing and things like that. And all these things, they can be very stable for a period, but then you have an election or things change and money is needed to defend instead of somewhere else, and some of these, that volatility, you need to take that into account in your investment process, and that was new for me. The whole supply chain sustainability, that's also something we worked on in my previous firm, but now we are also talking about wind and solar and battery and projects like that. They often require some specific minerals, and those things are sourced from places in the world that maybe have some ESG challenges, where and the traceability is not really good. So that's also part of it. Another thing is stranded assets. You can build something that looks today with current technology is good and it's green and so on, but something becomes obsolete because new technology comes in and disrupts what you built. So you can imagine you built this whatever project and it's really green, but now new technology actually says that, yeah, that was good, that was green in the old days, but now it's you can't use that anymore, and suddenly that undermines the whole green credentials that you have here, and a new cleaner solution is there, and you have a stranded asset, and it's again not just an icing code you can sell off, or it matters. Another thing you also experience in this world here is community backlash, because we all want to be green and so on, but we don't want those turbines in the backyard, or there might be there's some kind of visual thing here that impacts you. There is some noise. There is the land use. All of these things, they can delay the projects and they can force compensations, and there can be some a backlash from community where they are not happy with project you have. That should be on 100 kilometers the other way. Finally, I want to mention changing ESG standards, and that's of course something we have lived with for a long time, in the sense that or maybe we are going through some kind of process now to standardize, but it's at least still a very volatile area. And these long-term projects that we want to be green for 5, 10, 20 years and so on, but suddenly there could be new regulation, new taxonomy, new marketing standards for how you can market this product and so on. That can also be a challenge, so also a new risk. So these are just a few examples of these new perspectives on risk that I'm now trying to familiarize myself with.
It seems a lot of it is about transitioning from an immaterial to material world as well,
yes.
which you don't have to have in asset management. And just building on your last point, clearly ESG regulation, as you just mentioned, is evolving very quickly, right? And creates a lot of uncertainty, I suppose, from a business strategy, and especially during the time horizon you mentioned. How do you stay ahead of that and deal with it?
It is a real challenge. For a company like CIP, we have projects all around the world, so of course this exposure is high, and we have a dedicated ESG team. It's a quite large one, and their role is to understand and kind of stay on top of these regulations or upcoming requirements and so on. And that's, of course, a huge task. It's not something that you can sit in an office in Copenhagen and be on top of. You need legal and compliance help. You need local help to track regulations. You need some kind of external consultancy firms to help you out. But we need to track, and we need to participate in these different consultations and proposals. That's a way for us to prepare ourselves to see what is the trend, where are the regulators going on this, and then of course the very important part of data. Most regulation require data in some kind of way, better data, more quality data, auditable data, systems and tools that can manage this data and actually provide some insight. So that part is also important, trying to build a strong data structure on this, something that we can defend and audit and describe, and also that we can build some insight from. And then we need to link the development of the business strategy into this, and make sure that management is informed, if not on top, then at least informed, to kind of secure that we have the support and the budget to work with these things.
Søren, it was perfect transition actually, and segue into the next part of our discussion. And now I'd like to go back to artificial intelligence. I think nowadays we can't really have discussion on risk and business without talking about it, but also automation in risk management and data. And so from where you sit, from your perspective, where do you see the real opportunity, and what should we be cautious about in using those tools?
It's such an interesting time to be in this industry, also with the whole AI and the possibilities that are coming up. And I'm by no means a tech expert. I do try to follow as much, but as you say, also you can't have an interview, you can't have a talk or a conference and so on if AI is not on the agenda somehow. I do see potential in AI, of course, helping us out in a number of ways. From my limited experience or knowledge about this area, I can still see that there must be something around scanning and any new and upcoming regulations, mapping that into the internal framework documents that I have, and then also maybe even suggesting updates and so on. And things can be things that previously took a long time and might not necessarily be the most exciting work could be done very, very quickly and with high quality, and still be making sure that somebody's checking and we can audit and defend all we do. There's also the whole thing about flagging these anomalies in big data sets. It could be trading data or anything like that. There are patterns where we humans, we are simply limited. We can't see it, and we cannot see it as fast as the machine can. So these, I've seen these tools that can go through AML data or trading data and so on, and see patterns and flag something. And of course, what I've seen at least is also a lot of false positives and so on. But I guess that's part of the whole learning curve that we are on now. The systems also get better, and at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if they would just be, we would always trust the machine more than the human. When we build scenarios, stress tests, I'm sure that AI could also help us not being limited by our own experience and what we have seen or read, but actually come up with something more deeper, more relevant, some new perspective on things, so that we can have more quality in our scenario work. But for now, it still seems like we need this human in the loop, which is a strange concept because we know how flawed humans are. We make mistakes and so on. So why would we set a human to control a machine that doesn't make mistakes? Or maybe I'm just too binary here, but it's a funny concept, this whole human in the loop. But for now, at least, it seems to me that we still need some kind of oversight where a human can build on experience and so on and say, okay, this works, this doesn't work, or this helps me a lot, but I still need to do the final 20% myself. But things are moving fast these years or months or weeks even.
I think having used model for a very, very long time in my career, I've always been a big fan of having that human overlay anyway, if for anything to make sure that the results coming out firstly make sense and the interpretation of what it means. And from that perspective, for me, AI is no different than any other quant models I've seen in the banking industry for 20 plus years. I've never believed in a situation where you put everything in a machine, it comes back with a nice VAR calculation and no one is taking the thing at face value. It has always been a bad idea in my view. If for anything, because people don't even understand what they're looking at that context. So having that context and understanding of interpretation is critical in my view, especially nowadays with AI, which is providing you with an answer that looks good at face value, but if you don't have the background behind, you will not see that it's not actually what you need.
That's a good point.
And as digitalization continues, right, and more data, and you mentioned that even for your current role, kind of expands and become even more complex, especially in your space. How do you ensure the integrity of your data and risk reporting framework in that context?
And data is key, and there is so much of it, and we need to collect it and store it and make it reliable and available and all that regulation has also helped us with for some years now. We need to start with the basics that we have always done, the ownership of the data and securing the one source and making sure that we have a structure around this, build it into our taxonomy, build it into our risk reporting, making sure that we can trust the data sources. Then I can actually backtrack all the way back to what data was used here and what is the quality of that data, what is the reliability. And one part that at least I have also done is, and that kind of goes almost without saying, you need to include data quality as part of your risk appetite. So you need to measure your data quality and put some risk indicators on that and report on and monitor it, because have some report on breaches and have some indicators that can tell you if you're on the right track.
And for more details on that, I will invite people listening to the podcast to listen to the interview with Marie-Laurie, who's Chief Data Officer at SocGen, where we actually drill down into the type of framework that is required to manage everything you just mentioned. And perhaps one last question, and I've seen that time and again, so I need to ask it. Risk functions can be quite conservative in adopting all of those tools. So do you believe those functions are keeping pace with the change, or are they still too reactive and falling behind?
Yeah, I think there is a great deal of legacy in the way we do things in risk, and myself included. We have these huge and old financial institutions. They have risk frameworks. They were built in another time, but they are so interlinked with everything. They're ingrained in all they do. It's slowly updated. It's adapted, of course, with time, but it's still built on a core that was built in another time. Tearing this up and starting all over, that would just require a lot, and sometimes maybe too much. You can kind of compare it also to to financial institutions, big banks that have an old IT system, and they want to get rid of it. They want to have something modern in there, but they can't because they are just stuck with this, and they need to pay consultants that know this old programming language a huge amount of money simply just to get this hold this machine up in the air. But the old systems that we have, they are also built on some kind of post-fact reporting. So in May we report on what was going on in January to March. It's something that you could easily ask, if the business is interested and knowledgeable and so on, do we then provide them with something new when we come with a report that tells about something that happened half a year ago or 4 months ago? That's it. We still have standard processes like change management and also scenarios and product approval processes and so on. These processes, they force us to look ahead. So this is something that kind of is there to help us and help the business on trying to use the risk knowledge that we have and look ahead and try to be on top of this before things unfold. If we need to be less reactive as a business, one place to start is at least to be closer to the business, be closer to the first line and top management, and also into the strategy work. It's not that we necessarily need to sit and contribute a lot to the strategy work, but we need to be in there and be consulted and be that business partner, because then when the business and when management and the board they think ahead and they plan and for the business and the whole value of the creation, then we can upfront provide our perspectives, and that should, in theory, and I'm pretty sure in practice, also provide for better strategy work.
So now I'd like to take the discussion probably more toward leadership and culture, talent management. You've managed large, diverse teams, very different, in fact, in different contexts. What's your approach to developing talent and fostering risk awareness at all levels?
Yeah. First of all, I delegate. I delegate a lot, and that's something I've had to learn and become better at than I was previously. But it's something that works very well, in my view, on also maturing and providing, building a team that actually has fun in what they do and learns and matures and develops. I want people around me to be really good at their job, of course. We all want that. I want them to be very passionate about performing well, actually, feeling some kind of personal responsibility for the quality of the work that comes out from my department. And I don't want people to be afraid of taking responsibility. People that actually can look ahead and say, okay, this is my responsibility, and this is Søren, he sits and has this responsibility, and how can I make sure to help this whole department with what I can contribute, so that we as a team can look good, and Søren can help his manager look good, and all that. So that part, I feel that at least when I delegate, that's how I help building the business, and also where I find where people are not really capable or willing to find that in themselves. Risk is, in my view, a very specialist position. You need to understand most parts of the business. You're of course not an expert on all parts of the business, but you need to have a fairly good understanding of all parts of the value chain and see the links in between these things. And understand also the cause and effect and across this whole value chain, so that you can talk to the business, you can understand it, and you can actually make the connections. So I need people that has this broad interest, and we also need people that has pure model risk skills or pure liquidity management skills and so on experience. But in my view, when I try to build a team, it very much comes down to that personal curiosity about, I might be an expert on this part here, but I want to understand the full picture. I can't just sit here in my corner and only come to me when it has to do with my specialist area. That's not really how it works. So technical skills, yes, of course, we need that, especially nowadays, programming, data analytics, and so on. But the broad interest, that's my focus.
And when you think about risk culture at an organization level, how do you manage to embed that without turning into a bureaucracy or perceived bureaucracy across the organization?
Building a strong risk culture is not an easy task, of course, and it's most likely not something that I would be able to do myself. I've tried to understand how do you build a strong risk culture, and how can you help this culture to come into the light. And it's not something where you can read an article and then you can turn a risk culture, from bad to good over 2 months. It's something much larger than that. It of course starts with this tone from the top. I need management and the board and so on to understand it and to want it and to understand the need and respect for risk and compliance and what value it brings that we as a company all take that responsibility upon us. I might be hired to do something specific in this company, but I'm still a risk manager also. We're all risk managers in this company. Then I, of course, when I build a risk framework or adapt, or we try to fine tune our risk frameworks and so on, I needed to fit to the organization. So there are certain standards we want to meet, but we also need to start from what does this company do? What is the strategy? What is the value? What does success look like? And so on. And then make sure that my risk framework fits into that. So coming back to what we talked about earlier, that every company is different. We need to start from scratch there to make sure that we get it right. And of course, not overcomplicate it. And then we can market that internally. We have e-learnings, we have meetings, we have town halls. I can highlight the business reasons for why we do this and why we need it, and I can make sure to talk to people. It's very rare I can go out to business and say, according to this and this paragraph, you need to do this and this. It's much easier if I come and say, this will actually help our processes. This will give us more sales. This will give us less losses and so on if we do these things. Okay, that's something we can understand. Then it's we need in my team, and not only me, but my whole team, we need to go out and meet people and guide them. We need to be close to the first line and get known out there. They need to remember us, and the best way with that is that they have seen our face a lot of times, and we have maybe even helped out, provided some guidance and nudging, some assistance with different things. With due respect that we are second line, of course, but we can't sit in this ivory tower just looking down on the business and say work doesn't work and so on. We will not get known from that, not in a good positive way at least, and that will not help a risk culture. And then, of course, one thing I have found that I can, where I at least can tweak things a bit, is that you have the saying that what you measure you get more of. If you see that something is lacking, it could be the completion percentages of e-learnings or updates of policies and things like that. If you actually start measuring, putting some metrics on it and putting it in a report and setting a limit and say, we're not meeting this, then suddenly things start to happen. So you can, of course, nudge these things a bit. I would much rather prefer to sit together with the business and talk, and we can agree on this, instead of me starting to put it into a risk report and then it comes down through some kind of escalation.
And perhaps to explore one additional component to culture, which is close to my heart, as you know, is psychological safety. What role do you think psychological safety play in effective risk management?
As a second line function, we are sometimes considered this bearer of bad news or the ones that are policemen or a strong control function that can make or break careers. And that's of course a shame. It's not, as we talked about earlier, that's not in a modern setup how we should be seen and how we should operate, and that's not how it works. If you have an organization without psychological safety, your control functions are kept in the dark. Things are not surfaced. I would, as a control function, not be informed. It would always be an afterthought that I discover something on the internet or in the news and so on. And okay, why didn't anybody tell me that? People will not surface their mistakes. There will be no learning from that. So you need this culture where it's also safe to actually raise your hand, ask the question that might be a bit off or strange or maybe a bit dangerous, but also be able to raise the hand and say, we made a mistake. This is the learning from this, and here we can improve our processes, our controls, strengthen our controls, and so on. The culture that provides this psychological safety, I think it a lot of it can also come from this tone from the top, from management, if they also encourage a stronger culture and a safety in that we can talk about things and there will be no issues with that. But we can also have a second line function that just exercises the authority in a wrong way, and that will definitely not be helpful. That will be cutting off our own legs here, because if we don't help out with this psychological safety, and an error was made, let me come in here and help you on making sure that this we learn from this and so on, but no blame game and so on. That helps also the psychological safety along. But we can also ruin it ourselves, because we sit with that responsibility in second line. We need to engage and advise and help and find these pragmatic solutions and in general just support the business.
And I believe that the risk function and the risk processes especially play a core role in ensuring and fostering that aspect as well. And sometimes it can do the exact opposite, not deliberately, but it's structured in such a way that it actually impede psychological safety instead of enabling it. I'd like to bring the discussion to a close and perhaps look back a little bit into your career. So what's one risk-related belief you used to hold and now you change your mind about?
I used to think, I was a believer in a strong risk framework and a strong documented internal rules. I'm that kind of person that, okay, that's the rule. If that's the rule of the game, then we play with these rules, and then we play to win. I have learned, and I learned at some point, it's really no match for this culture and the incentives and so on. The bad culture, the wrong incentives, and a strong risk framework, strong internal rules does not help that. These things are much, much stronger. So you can try to build the best framework in the world. People, there will still be parts of the organization where this doesn't really matter, because something much, much stronger is going on, where somebody's breaking the rules, which is kind of wow.
Well, I think it's exactly what happened to Credit Suisse, right, where the frameworks were working, but no one spoke up. So as a result, we all know what happened to Credit Suisse. And I suppose you started answering the next question, what could be the one piece of advice you would give to a rising risk leader?
Try to be this business partner. Try to involve yourself with the business, show the value of risk management, show in your risk reports that you want to educate, you want to challenge, you want to provide this debate in your reporting. To try to lean into the first line. Full respect, we need the segregation of duties, and we need to make sure we adhere to the first and second line and so on. But you can still go very far in actually providing all the experience that we have and all the insights we have from across the whole business, and help that specific part of the business to become better. So business partner, huge thing.
And outside of ROC, I know you talk to risk conferences. I think you give some lectures as well as Copenhagen Business School. What's something you're passionate about?
I find cybersecurity very fascinating. As I said before, I'm not a techie, but I listen to a lot of podcasts on this topic, and it's always on top of my list, these podcasts, because I find it just so fascinating the whole world about information security and also these podcasts where you have your red team and blue team and the experiences from that and the learnings. And I'm fascinated with what people can do with that technological insight that they have, what they are actually capable of. Strategy work, I also find that very interesting. I don't have a lot of experience, but I'm educated myself. I have an MBA and so on. I would like to gain more practical experience on this, but it's something that I try to understand when I sit in a company like Nordea or CIP. I need to understand what is the strategy here, what are we working towards, and what are the levers that we are using, and that part I also find very fascinating, and it will help me in my work also.
And finally, what's next for you for 2025 and beyond?
We have a very fascinating journey ahead of us in CIP. We are still building on our risk and compliance frameworks. It's there and it's working, but we are improving and we are expanding on it. Still some parts missing, still some parts that I also want to change, simply because I think we are, as a growing company, things are just changing and we need to set it up in a bit different way. If I can, me and my team, we can succeed in implementing this professional risk management framework in fully, in throughout the whole organization in CIP, that is a very fast-paced and also very fast-growing company, then we have done well. But it's something about actually building while you are running, not just walking. You're running really fast because things are going really fast. New products are coming in, new ideas. Regulators are showing more and more interest, and a lot of new people are coming in. We are building all these different products, so it's something that will take much longer than just 25. But that's my focus for 25. We are on this path here. We need to take one step at a time, and we still have 6 months of 25, and there's a lot to do.
Yeah, as we say, in a parenting space, days can be very long, but the years go very fast. So. Søren, thank you so much for all of this insight. It was a treat. I think there's a lot to unpack from the discussion, so hopefully everybody listening to us today will have enjoyed the discussion. Best of luck for the next step in 2025 and beyond, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Julien. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of RiskMasters today. I hope you found today's conversation with Søren as insightful and provoking as I did. From aligning risk with strategic infrastructure investments to navigating regulatory complexity and building resilient teams, Søren offered a masterclass in modern risk leadership grounded in both experience and purpose. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, follow, and leave a review. Your feedback helps us continue bringing you top insights from industry leaders. For show notes, additional resources, and related articles, please visit avitium.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and join us next time for more deep dives into the future of risk, resilience, and leadership. And remember, real risk leadership isn't about avoiding uncertainty. It's about helping others navigate it with clarity, conviction, and courage. Until next time, I'm Julien Haye, and this has been RiskMasters.
Thank you for joining us on RiskMasters today. If you're ready to master risk and unleash your full potential, here's how you can take the next steps. First, head over to julienhaye.com to discover even more valuable insights from our RiskMasters. We've got a treasure trove of knowledge waiting for you. Second, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for fascinating discussions on risk management. And third, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it on social media. Help others discover the world of RiskMasters and embark on their journey of risk mastery. Remember, success favors the bold. See you on the next episode of RiskMasters.